we have got to understand who our God is. And people today seem to have lost the sense of who our God is and what our God is and what he can do and what his power and how he can be revealed. I mean, our God, yes, is a God that desires sacrifice. Because in both these occasions, all three of the occasions that I've referred to, whether it was Moses was to become the sacrifice. He had to give his life. In the case of Elijah, it was the oxen and the wood and the stones that were licked up by that fire. There was a sacrifice. And here, when Solomon has built the house of God and when he's built the temple, there is a sacrifice. In fact, what you understand is that if you turn back to chapter 6, and this is why I was coming back to chapter 6, that where the glory of God has come in chapter 5, the last verse, and in chapter 6, Solomon begins to speak. Then what does he do? In verse 12, he stood before the altar of the Lord in the presence of the congregation, spread out his hands. And what he'd done is, in verse 13, he'd made an extension in brass, an extension scaffold, they call it, in front, and set it in the midst of the court. And in verse 13 it says that Solomon stood and then kneeled down on that altar in the presence of the congregation. And it's when he begins to pray, as he does in verse 14, O Lord God of Israel, there's no God like you in heaven or in earth, which keeps its promises and shows mercy before all that walk before you with all their hearts. And he goes on to pray, but it says, and of course you know the bits here, verse 20, when heaven is shut up and there's no rain because the people have sinned. And yet, when they pray towards this place and confess their name and turn from their sin, then hear from heaven, forgive the sin of the people Israel. And in verse 28, if there's dearth in the land, pestilence, blood, mildew, locusts, caterpillars, or even if the enemies come, when these things happen, when the people pray, then in verse 30, hear from heaven and forgive. So there is such a sense here of sacrifice and of prayer. And you know, I'm really concerned because if I look at churches today, I find many churches, I've been in some recently, where at the front of the church is an altar. But you know, I'm tempted to ask, yes, there is an altar there, but there is no sacrifice. Yes, I know it's because Jesus became the sacrifice, but there is something very deep spiritually here, because if you look at Romans chapter 12, in the first verse, what's Paul saying there? He's saying, brethren, I beseech you that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice. So there is a call to Christians, there is a call to us to become part of a sacrifice, to make a sacrifice in order that the fire will come. And you know, I'm always being surrounded by people, and I get letters and calls and so on from people who are talking about we need revival, we need the fire to come back in the church. Yes, we need revival, we need the fire to come back into the church, but it will only come back when there is a sense of sacrifice. I mean, if I have to sacrifice a lot of personal ambition, personal pleasures, in order that I can find that place before God. And the interesting thing is this. Paul in Romans says, present your bodies a living sacrifice, which is your reasonable service. So according to the Apostle Paul, presenting everything, our lives, on the altar is only reasonable. That's what is expected from God. We used to sing in the old days, and I feel sad in a way because we don't sing a lot of the old songs. And I can remember the song we used to sing, and yes, which I used to lead when I was a pastor, lay your life on the altar for God. He's calling for you today. I don't hear that message. Where is that message? Lay your life on the altar for God. He's calling for you today. And this is a sense, there is a call today for this sacrifice. I mean, I'm very concerned about the church. I'm very concerned about the future of the church. And so many people are saying, we need revival, we need fire. But this will come, when we begin to pray and when we begin to sacrifice.